Ever notice how people sometimes throw in little details when telling a story that doesn't seem to really matter? Imagine a friend telling about the time they got stuck in an elevator with a group of people. They casually mention the fact that some lady in there was wearing a Big Chungus t-shirt and just move on. Now, the detail isn't crucial to the story of them being trapped in an elevator, but if you think about it, it does add a layer of realism. Someone making up a story might not include that detail, as it opens up questions about why they remember that specific thing. But because it's a real experience, those little extra details just naturally come out. This idea of dropping in seemingly irrelevant details is called an unexplained allusion, and it's something we can spot in ancient texts like the Gospels. In these stories, we find little details that don't seem necessary to the plot, and yet they're included. Unexplained allusions in the Gospels are a sign that these stories are based on real events told by people who were actually there. These details might not be important to the overall message, but they add a layer of authenticity that a made-up story might lack. Take John 2:12 for example. It mentions that Jesus spent a few days in Capernaum with his family and disciples after the wedding at Cana, but it doesn't say anything about what they did there. Then, the narrative just quickly moves on to their next destination, leaving the Capernaum visit hanging without any further details. There are also these moments where current events are casually mentioned in a way that the people in the story understand, but readers, especially Gentiles, might not. In Luke 13:1-5, for instance, Jesus talks about some recent events with the people in the crowd. He mentions a violent incident where Pilate killed some Galileans while they were preparing to make sacrifices. We don't have any records of this incident in contemporary sources like Josephus, so there's no reason to think that Theophilus, to whom Luke addresses the gospel, would have ever heard of it or been impressed with Luke's knowledge. But Luke doesn't even bother to elaborate. In the same conversation, Jesus also refers to those 18 on whom the Tower of Siloam fell and killed them. This seems like common knowledge to the people in the story, but it's not mentioned anywhere else but in Luke. It feels more like a casual conversation than a polished narrative. Another example is in John 3:25-26, where we hear about some argument over purification rituals between John the Baptist's disciples and another Jew. It says, "Now a discussion arose between some of John's disciples and a Jew over purification. And they came to John and said to him, 'Rabbi, he who was with you across the Jordan, to whom you bore witness, look, he is baptizing, and all are going to him.'" But this is just a lead up to the main point of the chapter, where John's disciples tell him about Jesus' successful baptismal ministry and the whole "I must decrease so that he might increase" thing. But whatever the argument about purification rituals were all about, we never find out. Later we see something similar in John 12:20-23. There we read, "During a feast, some Greeks approached Philip, saying they wanted to see Jesus. Philip told Andrew, and together they informed Jesus. Jesus responded by saying that the time for the Son of Man to be glorified has come." But what does that have to do with their request to see him? Did Jesus meet with the Greeks who wanted to speak with him? Why did he respond exactly that way? It's all just left unexplained. Moving back to the Synoptic Gospels, we see in Mark 15:21, where Jesus is on his way to be crucified, and Mark throws in this random detail. They compelled a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry his cross. Now, wait a second. Who in the world are Alexander and Rufus? They're name dropped like we should know them, but they're not mentioned anywhere else in the Gospels. This little detail suggests Mark's original readers knew these guys, adding a layer of authenticity to the story. Maybe Alexander and Rufus could back up their dad's involvement. Fun fact, Rufus may be the same guy that Paul greets in Romans 16:13, especially since Mark's gospel was likely written in the city of Rome. Whether or not it's the same Rufus, Mark's casual name drop makes the story feel real and grounded. Another unexplained detail happens post-resurrection in John 21:6. Picture this. Jesus, post-resurrection, calls out to his disciples from the shore while they're out on the water. Peter, always the spontaneous one, decides to drop everything and swim to Jesus. Now, get this, before he dives in, he throws on his coat. Now, usually you strip down before hitting the water, right? We might guess that Peter was getting his hands dirty and didn't want to meet Jesus half naked, but John doesn't spell it out. He just says Peter grabbed his coat and took a plunge. There are plenty more examples like this that show that the Gospels don't neatly fit into the literary fiction box. They're just too quirky, too oddly specific, with loose ends dangling. When C.S. Lewis talked about them not being artistic enough, this is probably what he meant. They're artless in a very cool and revealing way, in that they lack the slick polish of myths and read more like straight-up history. This is just one kind of evidence that supports the Gospels as being reliable eyewitness testimony. If you really want to go down the rabbit hole, be sure to check out these two playlists for a whole lot more. Thanks for watching.